Thank you for being here. We are very happy to see you today for this new panel about opportunities in the world of transition. We have a terrific panel here who is ready to address a question. Some people say we need a revolution in terms of the way we use natural resources. We need ideas. We need new thinking, how to produce more in order to meet increasing demand while making less of an impact on resources. Some people talk about a circular economy. Some people talk about maximizing of recycling. Some people talk about reinventing or reorienting markets, creating an alliance of sustainability winners. So how do we do that? Is there really a need for a revolution? A revolution is always dangerous, as you know. But we need radical changes. We need new policy. And so what are the real opportunities? I would like to introduce you to the panel here. Starting on my extreme right over there, we have the youngest panelist, and maybe the brightest, 20 years old only, Christopher Mosch, who is studying in St. Gallen in Switzerland. Sitting near him with Jan Johnson, who is the General Secretary or Secretary General of the Club of Rome. Near him we have the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who is a fan of Green Cross. And after him we have Mr. Jerry Jones, who is coming from America, from Little Rock, who is a support member, active member of the Club de Madrid and Clinton Foundation in Arkansas. And then Xavier Lépine, who is French, CEO of La Française. He has a lot of money to spend, but he has also some ideas. And Dimitri Zenghelis, who is from the London School of Economics. And he was very important job in 2008. He was leading the team of experts with Professor Stern, who published his famous report. So I hope you will be ready to contribute to this debate. I will give the floor, the occasion to talk and to ask questions at the end. We have 1 hour for this panel, and would like to ask you to welcome Ruud Lubbers, the former Prime Minister of Netherlands. Thank you.
I became green at the end of the 60s of the last century. Then I was a young father, having 3 children, and I saw the challenge to combine economic growth and an acceptable quality of life. So I promised myself to improve the situation, and that worked by being green. Rotterdam. And here, 20 years green grass. And I'm here in the first place as a friend of Michael Gorbachev, because that was the next phase in my life, challenge, being a Prime Minister in the Netherlands, having to make decisions on a new round of nuclear armament, to see if there was another solution. So that has led, you know that, in the Reykjavik, Reagan and Gorbachev coming to a different solution. No other round, but an agreement. So the second phase. For me, you cannot call it not green, but it's part of a world who tries to find solutions, not to escalate in all terms. So then I take you a little bit further. That's then Rio de Janeiro. You know that conference. It was chaired by Maurice Strong, but I remember very well the criticisms of civil society people, indigenous people. They sat there. Everybody seems to think that now we have market economy all over the world, it's all fine. But there's a big risk that we underestimate, that we neglect ecology, going for economy only. And then I supported this initiative to come to an Earth Charter. And 1 year later, I was informed that Michael Gorbachev, I said because the first point is that we were together in finding the solution in Reykjavik, and I found it very relevant. And when Michael Gorbachev was ousted out of the USSR in terms of power, he decided to go for a green cross. Green cross. He founded that. First man. So I thought, as a Prime Minister in the Netherlands, the best investment I can do now is to bring together Gorbachev and Maurice Strong to partner. It's a strong combination. So it went on. Of course, when we talk green, the key point for me was the report, Our Common Future, of Gro Harlem Brundtland. I was Prime Minister in the Netherlands, he was Prime Minister in Norway. The partners in green. So it went on. And then I decided to go here. Earth Dialogue, see some friends again. It's very simple. Few remarks maybe. When I measure the situation in 1991, Rio de Janeiro, and the years in between, I see positive developments as well. When for quite a while civil society was in trouble with business and the other way around, they were antagonists, blaming each other all the time. I see now the positive dimensions. You see, you know already the word corporate social responsibility. I see flourishing civil society efforts all over the world. And as a Earth Charter person, I even think that effective change in the good direction is only possible when politics work together with business and civil society. And that is happening more and more. So it is a positive thing. There are negative developments as well, of course. The lack of courage and the wish to really go to do better. Not blaming the others, but doing efforts. To have really to do more. With that, let me end, not to talk more than 3 minutes. I see many reports about gloom and doom, that everything is going wrong. But as an Earth Charter person, I would like to say that the most important thing in your life, in my life, in our life, is the joyful celebration of life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So if we need a transition on what values, on what economy can we work, I think it's a very important question, and I think Jan Johnson, who is General Secretary of the Club of Rome, will talk about that. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We heard this morning about the nature of the complex problems we face. There's always a tendency to think that there's a simple solution, a single simple solution, and it is mine. The truth is, solutions are going to be multifaceted and integrated, and we must understand that. The second thing, I think there's been a great deal of emphasis on technological solutions. I listened this morning very carefully. Technology is important, economics is important, but transformational issues have also been driven by ideas. Ideas can be as transformational as technology. So we've got to look to leadership that is about new ideas and new ways of thinking and new beliefs, not just new technologies. And that raises the issues of values. I think we need to encourage the normative debate within and amongst civil society on a number of fronts. number of dimensions. One is the intertemporal, whether we care about the future. Secondly is spatial, whether we consider ourselves truly global citizens with a belief in and a tolerance of our globality. And the third is our relationship with nature. Are we a part of or are we apart from nature? Those are defining issues for our values conversations that we should have and we should encourage. But a few points I will make today are really about economics and their application. Simply put, we've got the wrong economics for our times and the challenges we face. In fact, I'm so concerned sometimes about our economic thinking and how misaligned it is that I wonder sometimes whether we should not be abandoning it and looking for a new theoretical construction of humanity and its progression. And I think that's something that needs to be thought about with new disciplines being brought in. We rarely have psychologists, for example, at these kinds of meetings. It would be politicians, economists, etc. It's an interesting point, I think. But let me turn to the nuts and bolts of what I wanted to say. I'd like to make 5 very short points on our economics and the misalignment. The first is an obvious one, is the pricing of goods and services in order that they reflect fully their true societal costs. And if we did that and we embedded them within thinking of full cycle costs or circular economy, we would see 3 effects, I think. We'd induce efficiency, we would build the platform for the decoupling that Ernst talked about, I won't go into that, and I think we'd see new models of consumerism that would be linked to the reduction and elimination of planned obsolescence and of resource efficiency, the work that people like Walter Stahl has done at the Risk Institute here in Geneva. Secondly, jobs, jobs, jobs. We constantly forget about the nature of economics and its inability to provide jobs for the 300 million people formerly unemployed in ILO statistics, the highest ever, and the 1.7 billion people on planet Earth who are under the age of 15 and are going to be the greatest resource we inherit or the greatest problem we inherit. Jobs and the link between economy and jobs is vital. And there I have to say, governments around the world seem to tax labour, which is something we seem to want more of, and subsidize the destruction of natural resources, which is something we seem to want less of. We've got to reverse engineer that. My third point is that, and I will only mention briefly, the financial sector has to be aligned with the real economy. It has drifted apart. It has become divorced from the real economy. We've got to reverse that. The financial sector must be the servant of the real economy, not the reverse. And we need to do 3 things there. We need to think about how we lengthen the market. We need to think about how we trim the excesses of speculation and bring the market down to reasonable risk and reward ratios. And we need to think how we make next generation markets out of public goods. Carbon we've already tried. There are others I think we could do. 5th point is, let's not forget that a large part of our world consumes too little, not too much. Something we must always keep abreast of, that those of us sitting in this room probably consume too much, but there's a part of humanity that consumes too little. My final point, my final point on economics, I think we need to look hard at monetary policy. It's a domain that has sort of escaped, I think, attention with respect to sustainability, and we need to think of directive and progressive refloating of economies in new ways, and I think there's a lot of work to be done on monetary policy in that respect. My final comment is that all of the problems we're talking about are anthropogenic. We often only use anthropogenic in terms of climate change, but humanity has made all these problems, and with the kind of ingenuity we have, there's no reason why we can't restore or undo them. So I think we have to have policies, we have to have approaches, we have to have solutions that give hope. And there is a tendency, as Ruud Lubbers said, to sometimes rest on doom and gloom, when in fact there are solutions out there. And if we have the right values, the right political will, the right institutions, in markets especially, we can actually overcome those problems. Thank you.
Well, as you said, we need to end the divorce between the financial sector and the real economy. I'm going to give the floor to Xavier Lépine, who is coming from France, who is the CEO of La Française, an asset manager. Please, Xavier.
Thank you. Well, first thing is, the asset manager is there C'est vrai que je peux parler en français, ça sera
I've got
plus
to
simple.
speak French, it'd be easier.
Le gérant d'actifs, nous
The
sommes là
asset
pour
manager is
intermédier
there
le temps
as
et
an
l'espace.
intermediary between time and
C'est-à-dire
space.
pour gérer
By that I
l'épargne,
mean we manage
préparer les
savings
retraites des
in order to
épargnants.
prepare for
C'est
the
ce genre de
retirement and pensions of the
problématique que
savers.
nous avons.
These are the kind of issues
Or,
we
nous
deal
sommes
with.
dans un monde où
But we live in a world
il est
where
évident que ce qui a
it's
changé depuis
obvious
30 ans,
that what's changed
on le sait, la
the most in the past
globalisation
30
et
years is
surtout
globalization, as we all
l'accélération
know. But also what we've seen is an
fait que on ne
acceleration,
peut pas gérer de la même
which
manière
means
et la
that you can no
problématique
longer
est
manage as you did in the
résolument
past.
différente.
The issues are
C'est vrai qu'il y a
very
des
different.
mondialisateurs et des
It's true that
mondialisés.
there are globalizers and the globalized. And this is creating problems. And the gentleman before me spoke about this. Finance is now working more and more for itself. But I'd like to go back to a point. The statement made recently by the Secretary of State of the United States in 1972 when he said the dollar is our currency, but it's your problem. That sentence sums up the situation in one sentence. This refusal to take a holistic view of society, this refusal to recognize the need for global governance. If we really want to manage people's savings properly, manage the world properly. What does that mean? Well, what it means is, quite simply, how can you expect financiers to manage properly in a world where politicians, policies and governments are still not on the page? By that I mean is that you know that in finance you have hundreds and hundreds of indicators that follow capital markets, the stock exchanges throughout the world, but there's no indicator that follows the quality of global governance. We don't know whether global governance is moving in the right direction or in the wrong direction. We don't know, for example, whether exchange rates, which in fact govern global competitiveness, encourage companies to move from one country to another to take advantage of exchange rates. We don't know whether the purchasing power parity of a country and its official GDP are going up or not because of the currency. And we don't really know whether what the policies that government really are. We're not following closely the changes in the cost of labor in the world to encourage governments not to have the same labor costs, but to have competitiveness at a reasonable level. Everyone knows Ricardo's theory on specialization worldwide, global specialization. But Ricardo, it's quite clear, Ricardo said that globalization will only work if competitiveness is fair. And today it's not fair competition because each country can take whichever path it wants to take. So to ask investors to be socially responsible as investors will not work if the governments themselves are not collectively accepting, do not collectively accept an indicator of global governance which allows us to determine whether global governance is moving in the right direction on two basic factors, exchange rates on the one hand and production conditions on the other hand. By that I mean wage costs, unless there's convergence in those two areas. So just to conclude, it's true that an investor who's not socially responsible as compared to an investor informed about sustainability, and sustainability is clearly global competitiveness. An investor who's correctly informed about global sustainability will invest in a sound way.
Merci, merci, merci Xavier Lépine.
Thank you, Xavier Lépine.
Dimitri Zenghelis, you are working at the London School of Economics. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. So the question that we're asking here is how do we go about trying to realize the opportunities of a world in transformation? And I think that the place to start is the recognition that this is a world in transformation and that the transition to a resource-efficient, low-carbon economy is inevitable. And if people want to argue against that, then I think that's great because you can bring them onto territory where you will clearly win. It's inevitable, not just because of the policy response which will eventually come, but because in the absence of that policy response, you've got 7 billion people on the planet, that's going to rise to 9 or 10, and billions of those in China, in India, in other countries are going to move from positions of consumption levels of relative poverty to those that we are familiar with in the West, which is going to mean substantial pressure on resource prices across the world. So one way or another, the incentives to become more resource efficient are going to increase substantially. So once you recognize that, the question is no longer if, it's when. So the question is, how do you manage that transition? How do you manage that change? And of course, if you're aware that the change is inevitable, it makes sense to understand that you will be better off moving with your eyes open than trying to deny that the change is necessary at all. So you immediately understand the urgency of the problem, not just because resources become irreversibly depleted and the stock of greenhouse gases goes up and up, but because if you lock into the wrong infrastructure, you will find it very costly to retrospectively replace and retrofit and demolish that infrastructure. It's not just physical infrastructure, by the way, it's also psychological infrastructure, it's behavioral infrastructure, it's mindsets. I can think of many examples, but take one, cities. If you live in a sprawling car-based city, you will build constituencies that lobby for low petrol prices and more roads. If you live in a dense, say, European-style city, you will quickly lobby for cycle lanes and public spaces and public transport. And you might even lobby for congestion charging against vehicles. So these are mindsets as well as physical infrastructures, though the two are very much related. And once you've locked into one, it's very difficult to move away. But it also requires an understanding that if this is the way the world is going to go, the big financial opportunities are going to be in resource efficiency and renewables. China understands that through its commitment in the 12th five-year plan. Korea understands that. We've seen what's happened to industries that lobby themselves to death by not realizing the way the world is going to go, and the American car industry may be a good example there. So this is going to happen. It pays, therefore, to try and manage that transition. We can get into a debate as to whether you're better off being a first mover or a fast follower, but ultimately you will have to lose. And then the final point, when you recognize that the transition is inevitable, is you have to understand that there will be winners and there will be losers. There will be distributional consequences. This will not just be win-win, and we need to be very careful in identifying who the losers are, because it's the losers that will slow this process down. Its vested interests already are lobbying much harder than the potential winners, because the losers know exactly who they are. They know exactly in what form and how much they're going to lose. The potential winners are just that. In many cases, they're potential. They're new innovators that haven't yet commercialized their products. And in most cases, they're you and me and their future generations that have not been born. So unless you understand that asymmetry, you will never make progress on this. Because ultimately, the barriers that are preventing this transition are not economic. They're not technological. They are cultural, they are political, and they're institutional, and that's where we need to focus our attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have now a speaker coming from America. Yesterday, John Kerry, the American Secretary of State, said that it was not too late to act, and remembering that the next goal is 2015, there will be a conference in Paris. So it's not too late, but what can we do, and what is the role of business in this matter? So Jerry, who is a member of a very big company in charge of data based in Little Rocks, is now on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. First, I want to echo the comment of Mr. Picard this morning. It is insufficient to simply talk of problems. Problems are an insufficient motivator for change. Solutions is what we must be focused on. That's probably not surprising to hear that come from me, since I have known President Clinton since I was a young man in 1973, and he came from a place called Hope. And it was about the future. And the way that he got himself elected to the presidency of the United States was to put forth a plan for the future that could be realized and that you could drive towards. And he understood that there were a vast number of constituencies across the United States that he had to reach out to. business was one. I thought that today I would take a few moments to defend the role of business and to show that business can be a force of absolute positive change in a transformative world. Capitalism is the greatest wealth and well-being creator the world has ever known, and conscious capitalism will lead the way to more prosperity for more people. You know, Professor Friedman said that the only serious social responsibility of business was to maximize profit. He's wrong. He's dead wrong. A much broader view of business is appropriate. Society grants corporations the right to exist, so there has to be a balance. Value cannot be flowing in only one direction for very long. That is unsustainable. Profits clearly are critically important, as they allow the continued existence of a business. And the company does provide jobs and things that people need for a better life. But profits are not what truly sustains a business over the long run. Purpose is what sustains a business more than profits and creates lasting value creation for all of the interdependent constituents. If you are solely focused on profits, you only keep your eye on the next 90 days, or perhaps the next 180 days under the European system. In America, it's every 90 days. The market votes on us every single day. But if that is the only thing that we keep our eye on, we insufficiently invest for the future, we do not plan for the future, and we're merely a trading opportunity, as opposed to a creator of value and jobs and opportunities. There are tremendous opportunities to transform our world in a positive manner if we can get government, the private sector, NGOs, and business to work together towards conscious capitalism. You know, much of the progress of the last 20 years can be attributed in large part to the corporate form. Examples: we live longer. We've almost doubled the life expectancy across the world. Much of the credit goes to business. Standard of living in my home country has increased 10,000 times since 1800. South Korea is a great example of the impact of a more free economy. Their GDP has increased 260-fold since 1960, taking it from one of the poorest nations to one of the most prosperous. And of course, the contrast with North Korea is very stark. Within capitalism, the true heroes are entrepreneurs, for they solve problems by envisioning what can be and get about with the job of making it happen. Perhaps the most important factors in free enterprise capitalism success have been, however, entrepreneurship and innovation, coupled with freedom and dignity for business people. And I cannot emphasize too much the importance of freedom. The freedom to try, the freedom to fail, and the freedom to succeed. As the moderator, as Dimitri just mentioned, we know not who the winners of the future will be. We probably have a better idea of the losers. But if we don't have the freedom to try, there will be insufficient winners. The former Soviet Union had the greatest mathematicians on the planet. But where was the PC developed? In a garage. In a garage. By two young guys who thought they could see the future, and they had the freedom to try it. They didn't have to go ask for permission. They didn't have to go ask for a license to do anything. They were able to just do it. Hernando de Soto, the famous economist, did a study of what it would take to create a company with 2 sewing machines, I believe in Peru. 200 permissions. How do you feed a family when it takes 200 yeses to get to the starting gate? You can't do it. There has to be freedom for business to prosper and to create the jobs that are necessary. So with all these benefits, why is business and capitalism under such an attack these days? I think there are probably 4 reasons. 1, we have an old narrative. The ethical foundation of business and capitalism has been hijacked by those who focus simply on a narrow and self-serving identity, and the inherent goodness and virtue needs to be highlighted. Secondly, businesses have operated with too little respect for how they impact the world. Third, there's the myth that business is and must be about the maximization of profits. This has taken hard root in academia and in business, with business leaders being robbed of the ability to engage and connect with the people at a deeper level. And fourth, crony capitalism, protecting the status quo, where governments have restricted competition in favor of well-connected and successful businesses. So what should be done? I believe it is imperative that we move the perspective of business to higher ground. Business is good because it creates value. It is ethical because it exists upon voluntary exchange. It is not compulsory. It is heroic because it lifts people out of poverty and creates economic prosperity. So how can we get more benefits? One way is to defend it and help people realize that business must be grounded on an ethical system that creates value for all stakeholders, not just the owners. Money, clearly, is one way to measure value, but it shouldn't be the only way to measure value. And so we need to help people understand that when they participate in capitalism, they are part of the largest force for positive social transformation in history.
And now I'm giving the floor to Christopher Mosch, who is 20 and who will be 27 in 2020 and 37 in 2030, when it is supposed to be that the planet will need, in fact, 2 planets to sustain the need of the population. So that's your future. And you are going to tell us what you think should be done and what we should think about to prepare that time. Thank you.
As he said, that's my future, and in advance of this conference, and I think Mrs. Lepage touched it in the first panel, I thought about how does it come that we're using GDP as an indicator of our quality of life, and what are the advantages of the GDP. And as I pondered about that, I came up with 2 reasons. The first one, I think, is that it's a little bit like a legacy, because till a certain stage of development, GDP is the most significant indicator for quality of life, since it is reducing our sufferings tremendously and ends our struggle for survival. So what has happened in the developed countries is, I think, that after passing that stage of development, we just kept GDP as our main indicator. And doing this, even though the correlation of GDP and our happiness and quality of life decreased sharply. The second is a technical reason. GDP, as an indicator as such, is easy to quantify. It's an amount of money expressing the yearly profits of all economic entities. It's thereby objective, in contrast to happiness itself, for example. It's assignable in temporal as well as objective respect, so it's just the aggregation of the individual's yearly profits, and it's omnipresent. Nearly everything a value expressed in money is assigned to, if not in order to buy it, then by some insurance to calculate the monthly payings. And I think for that reasons it is very difficult to find another indicator to replace GDP. And even if you try to solve this problem by using a set of indicators, you have to face the other problem that they have to fulfill the earlier mentioned criteria. So when this cannot be the main solution, what could it be then? What could we do to use our focus on GDP, or the fact that we are at the moment focusing on it? And I think it is that we can change the way we're using the GDP. And I think we should do, instead of striving only for self-actualization, focused on our own pleasures, which promotes consumption and was also influenced by Mandeville's idea of private vices leading to public benefits, which means addressing the responsibility for the desired outcome to the government, to those who make the laws. Instead of doing this, we should adopt responsibility-guided behavior ourselves, based on the fact that we are not struggling for the survival anymore, that we have the freedom to decide, and also because we are just the lucky ones who were born in developed countries. It is not that somebody has chosen us for whatever reason to live here, to live in developed countries. No, it's just because we are the lucky ones. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we have about 25 minutes or less for the debate, and probably you might have some questions. So if you have, I would be happy. But first of all, I would like to ask the former Prime Minister of Netherlands, after you have heard everything today, everybody says we need a change, we need radical changes, we need a revolution. What is the first thing that should be done to really make a change and not only talk about the need of a change? What should be done in our world? Where does it start?
Very subjective, I think. I tend to say it starts with the understanding the will of people to work together. This is my first point. I mean that in different dimensions. Together, because people are doing something. On my left is a protagonist of business. It's fine. Yeah. Others came to me here, civil society persons do so. I come from a world of politics, who regulates things and makes laws. So this is a key point for me. You cannot have a better world if people who are active in different walks of life don't understand that they are not effective at all. If they think, I'm going to do the job on my own. So this is a key point. A second point, in my opinion, is that it's good as youngsters, people who grow, I did myself, understand that we are living in a changing world anyhow. The success is enormous today that we are interconnected worldwide. Now that gives at the same time problems, of course, but here on my right, Jan is there representing the Club of Rome. That I tell him, in my life, this was a very important moment. My first sentence was, I was in Rotterdam, in the reality of a city fast growing, how to solve the problems, that you have a growing city and you need quality of life. The second point is, almost in the same time I was reading this report of the Club von Rome, opened my eyes that you make the assumption that at some point in life, in our lifetime still, you will see that there is a wish to develop countries and they will become successful, but what will it mean for the environment, for nature? This is essentially the analysis of the Club of Rome. They didn't solve anything, but they made it for this young boy those years clear. Oh, you have to be aware of that's going to happen. And when I was sitting in the conference meeting in Rio de Janeiro, the world was celebrating market economy all over the world. This was great. But of course it was only the beginning of what I experienced in Rotterdam as a young man. How do I combine growing wealth with quality of life in all dimensions? So this is the next. So if you ask me what is the most important, is the awareness. You can do on your own. You're living in a world which is changing anyhow. And the third maybe, and there I end, in terms of what is important, is that spirituality, which gives oxygen to individuals, is not something of luxury. To find some time for yourself, to continue to be a person who really lives, and that requires spirituality as well. So my expectation is that I'm positive, but these are the three important things. You ask me to be a bit more specific, and I'm too subjective.
All right.
So don't listen too much to me.
Oh, I mean, we have seen a lot of local. Thank you. Well, we have seen some local initiatives everywhere. One of the main questions is how can this isolated initiative can be scaled up to the proper level of society of the world to make it efficient? Is it something that can be done? How can it be done?
Well, I think there can be many barriers, and they're going to be very site-specific. I think knowledge is one, and I don't think we've done a good enough job, given the technologies we have, of really disseminating the kind of knowledge so that we can scale out very, very quickly. The second thing is, I think you have to provide a conducive framework. Increasingly, the difference between the public good and the private good, I think, is becoming slightly blurred. That is not a negative about markets, quite the reverse. I think market instruments are essential, but I do think we need to think about the public good, and knowledge is one of the public goods. The internet, for example, which spurred the 2 kids in the garage, was a government-sponsored and subsidized program that had a huge, I think, positive externality by and large. So I think the first is knowledge and information, and the second is in the inducements that are needed. I do think that in this world of ours, more recently, the drying up of liquidity for small entrepreneurs is is a major impediment to exactly the kinds of things that were done a few years ago, and I think that does need to be addressed in the very near term.
Dimitri, we heard about a concept that is called the circular economy that might improve the situation. We heard also about eco-imagination. We heard about become net positive. A positive impact on environment should be more than the negative one. So, what is circular economy? Is it one of the key? What is eco-imagination? Are there real solutions, concrete solutions there?
They absolutely are real solutions. They're all. I know this goes back to the K word that we've been talking about, knowledge. One of the wonderful things, one of the positive silver linings of the predicament we find ourselves in is that knowledge tends to work in one direction. It's very easy to learn things. It's rather difficult, unless you start burning libraries, to unlearn things. And because of that, indefinite growth is actually possible. We can continue to grow, purely because of progress in the intellectual economy. Knowledge isn't subject to the second law of thermodynamics. It's weightless and infinite. It doesn't run out. It builds upon itself. It provides increasing returns. So we can, in principle, decouple growth from things, resources, materials, inputs, if we use knowledge carefully. And knowledge is what's going to be behind use and reuse of materials. It's going to be behind renewables. It's going to be behind energy efficiency. It's also going to be behind psychologies and behavioral change, which we've talked about. A lot of this is about mindsets as much as it is, and about institutions, by the way, as much as it is about widgets and individual bits of technology. So, yeah, I think the future, precisely, thank heavens, is in decoupling through the intellectual economy. I think somebody mentioned earlier, we need to shift our tax base from the intellectual economy, from things we want to encourage, like labour, saving, investment, to the things we want to discourage, like pollution, excessive resource use, depletion of public goods, and so on. And that will be a prerequisite, I think, for making progress in this area.
I mentioned that you were working with Professor Stein in 2008. Are you preparing a new report? I mean, is there going to be something as big as it was? I mean, is there some scoop around here?
No, the Stone Review was a one-off. It wasn't ever intended to be a running commentary, if you like, of developments. It was supposed to act as a template for addressing the issues. There are various initiatives being undertaken. In fact, there is one rather large initiative. I don't know how much I can say about it. It's not led by Nick Stern himself, although he's actively involved in it, which you probably will be hearing about in the next few months. So, and there's a lot of... Which is? I don't think I can. It hasn't even been given a title, I think, yet that satisfies my. But keep an eye out.
Okay, we will. Okay, so is there a question I see one here, one here, please. Yeah. Thank you.
Je vais poser ma question en français. Lucie Martin, je suis doctorante à Sciences Po.
I am in
j'avais une
political
question
science. I'm doing a doctorate in
pour
the
rebondir
University
sur ce
of
qui a été mentionné
Geneva.
dans
I would
le
like
premier panel,
to
mais
ask
également
about
par
something
Monsieur
that was
Jones
mentioned in the first panel and also by
sur le
Mr.
ton du
Jones in
discours
this
à
panel
avoir.
on
En fait, vous avez
the
dit à
kind
plusieurs
of
reprises qu'il fallait
discourse we
avoir des
need to use.
solutions
You've
plutôt que
repeatedly said we
présenter les
have to have
problèmes.
solutions
Et
rather
il me semble
than
que c'est ce
to
qui a
formulate the
finalement été
problems.
fait à Rio plus
I think
20
that's what was done at
avec
Rio
cette
plus
idée
20
de
with
slogan,
the
le
idea
futur
of
que nous voulons,
slogans, the future we
et
want,
notamment tout le projet
and
autour de l'économie
above
verte.
all, the whole
Et ma question
project
c'est
about a
si vous
green
pensez qu'il y a
economy.
eu
So
plus
my
de progrès
question is,
en
do you think
parlant
there's been
en
more
ayant un discours
progress
optimiste
in
contrairement au discours
by
pessimiste
using an
qu'on avait
optimistic
pu notamment avoir à Copenhague?
kind of
Merci.
discourse rather than the sort of pessimistic discourse we
Je pense
heard
que
in
c'est une question globale,
Copenhagen?
donc, j'imagine
I think
que
it's
c'est
an overall general question. Moderator, there's one person who's going to answer. Oh, I have to choose then. That's difficult. Mr. Jones, perhaps, could you answer it, says the speaker, since you mentioned this issue during this panel? And could I just add another question? Doesn't the tone of the discourse depend on the audience and the political timing rather than just saying it's not sufficient to talk about problems? Thank you.
Well, in terms of the tone, of course, the audience and the constituencies always have to be taken into account. But what matters is the truth. And the truth should be basically the same truth for all audiences. In terms of being positive or negative, in terms of innovation, let me briefly talk about the story of aluminum as illustrated in the book Abundance. 2,000 years ago, aluminum was discovered. And the discoverer of aluminum used a chemical process to extract the metal from the ore, and he made a plate, and he gave it to the Roman emperor. Well, the emperor and all of his ancestors had spent their entire lives and careers conquering the rest of the world, and their wealth was based on gold and silver. And yet, this new thing, this new metal, could be made out of clay? Well, what to do with the status quo? We must preserve it. Off with his head. It took another 2,000 years before aluminum made a comeback in the time of Napoleon, and then it was still a chemical process, and it was the most valuable metal on the planet. The most valuable metal on the planet. Another 100 years or so pass, and we discover how to harness electricity. And we discover the process of electrolysis. And what happened? Aluminum became the cheapest metal on the planet, and it literally became a throwaway metal. Now, in terms of change and in terms of prosperity, what we have to do is compact the time that it takes to go from the most expensive metal to the cheapest metal through innovation, through knowledge. We can be negative about it, or we can be positive about it. Consider this. If the ancient Greeks knew what electricity was, but it was not until the time of Voltaire that we're able to harness electricity. And what if, in the next 100 years, humanity discovers a way to produce electricity that has nil cost both economically and environmentally? We'll easily be able to feed the world's population. We'll be able to use the other 99.5% of the world's water that we cannot use now because we can clean it up. We'll be able to irrigate the deserts and feed the world. I'm optimistic that we will figure that out.
Thank you. Another question over there. Yes. Can you stand up? Yeah, please. Back there.
John Feigen, International HGH and Pesticide Association, the Netherlands. I heard some issues about GDP, and I would like to ask and make some statements about growth. I think that growth has been becoming the disease of society. Growth without any objectives we are facing. If we are able to turn around growth into sustainable deliveries, what every company or association is doing for that society, we are on the right track, and I would like to have some input from you, from the panel.
And we take the question here, sir, yes, with the green tie. Yes, please stand up, thank you.
My name is Langos. I'm French-German co-editor of Didi magazine, which is Développement Durable, so Sustainable Development, and I'm a lawyer active in renewables and efficiency. I've got a question to Mr. Lubbers as the only politician here on the panel. Don't you think that we need to encourage more the young people and at the same time educate them so that they get more involved in politics and to move a little bit the game forward? And I'm very happy with the 5 points of Ian Johnson that you mentioned here. But I think very often we need more what is said before by Bertrand Piccard to combine economy with ecology and to give positive examples, positive solutions, and to really to encourage the young people to participate in politics, to participate in economy, to encourage them through education to set up their businesses. But so far, very often, particularly in politics, well, let's say the older people stay in position and then don't encourage the younger ones to go into parliament.
Thank you. So maybe Jan Johnson, you can answer the first question and the second one, and then Ruud Lubbers.
I think the issue on growth is it's a good point. One of the questions, I think, is not so much the debate on good growth versus bad growth. The real question is, what sort of society do we want to create, and how will economics and economy deliver what we want? We never really ask that question. And I think, that is prosperity, that is basic needs, that is happiness, safety, security. We need to understand what we're trying to achieve. What we're doing with growth is saying, let's grow and then figure out what it does. We've got to reverse engineer our thinking on this, it seems to me, and ask the question, what sorts of societies do we want to create, and what role does economy, and there are other disciplines that will play a role in delivering that kind of society we want. So I think it's the wrong question in certain senses.
Thank you. Mr. Lubbers?
You addressed me as a former politician, and you said, how do you promote young people to go into politics and transform the world, if I understood your question right. Now you put this question to me on the wrong day. Why? Because the best we can do for youngsters as politicians is to make examples that are a bit creative. But if I take the media of today, it's all about Syria. And I heard the President of America saying, we feel responsible for the fact that what was happening in Syria. So he formulates his responsibility that he has to act. And he's looking at what are the alternatives of using violence. Now, and then I was yesterday morning with my friend Gorbachev. Some of you were there maybe. And Gorbachev asked those in the audience who are from America, when they return, to touch base on what way was possible technically with Washington, to say that they are telling wrong things and having wrong plans. So I was there in that meeting that morning yesterday, and I said, although we consider Gorbachev as a good friend, this is bad advice, Michael. At least you have to add to that, to the Russian friends here, that they turn to Moscow and say it's stupid not to think that the presence of chemical weapons in Syria is not the responsibility of Moscow. It is a responsibility of Moscow as well. Maybe they can argue who used these chemical weapons, but there are chemical weapons. Everybody has to accept that as a fact. So take your responsibility, Washington and Moscow, sit down together. What can we do to guarantee the world, Russia and America, that chemical weapons will not be used there? So therefore, your question to me is on the wrong day. Sometimes politicians give bad examples. They disagree, they disagree, they disagree. So that's the end.
I have a question back there. Here, please, one question.
Joël Ruet, IDRI Sciences Po and Center for China and the World Economy at Tsinghua University. I have a question for Dimitri Zenghelis. Hi, Dimitri. I got your argument that on the long term, many corporations might be wrong or even losers. I'm afraid we're losers too. Now, on the long run, we're all dead, but if we're losers with this corporation, it's a pretty bad prospect. My question and suggestion is very simple, is that a lot of resources are now vested with the financial funds, with sovereign funds. Now, those very particular type of corporations are very limitedly focusing on long-term investment. This is very difficult to talk to them about long-term investment. B, this is even more difficult to talk to them about inflections on the long run, ruptures on the long run, or totally new blue ocean structures. I believe that this is a key prospect for future, and it's a key asset we have to tap before this accumulated capital goes to waste.
The next question here, please.
I'm Bertrand Picard. The moderator dared to ask an excellent question. It was what I said.
Introduce yourself. Thank you.
I introduced myself. I said I am Bertrand Picard. I was in the previous panel. So I repeat the question. The moderator dared to ask an excellent question. It was, what would be your first action? And once again, the answers from the panel, as it is in every international conference, is about concept, ideas, but not about actions. So I think when we have dialogues, it should not just be about speaking, it should be about coming to conclusions. So my question is for the moderator, can you please ask again to every member of the panel, what would be his first action and not thought to make a difference in this world?
Okay. But first we will answer the question before yours. Dimitri, and maybe Xavier Lépine will have something to say about the funds and the use of the funds.
Thanks. Well, it's a very good question. And I'm not going to be drawn into how to make financial markets necessarily more long-termist in their thinking. You can devise all sorts of financial instruments that aim to do that. The fact is that we are now in a world where there is record surplus private saving out there, unprecedented amount of surplus private saving, and for the most part it's being put into financial instruments that are low risk, usually US and other solvent sovereign bonds that are earning pretty much zero real interest. And so if you think about that, that's a scandal. I mean, there's so much more that can be done with that money in this environment. Why? Well, the simple answer is that the private sector is spooked, it's risk averse. At the best of time, it's particularly risk averse right now. So without confidence, the private sector isn't going to invest, and it's not going to invest in the new economy if it feels, as somebody said before, that the policy regime is simply not credible, that the public sector will change its mind, it will renege on agreements and so forth. So unless you have a clear and credible signal to eliminate or reduce policy risk, the private sector is not going to put its money into the long term. And there I disagreed a little bit with Jerry. I think the private sector is short-termist, does focus on making profits, does want to please Wall Street and its shareholders rather too much. So how do you create a credible steer? Well, the US is a very good example, actually. Yes, stuff is created in the back of a garage, but actually an awful lot of stuff, if you look at the iPhone, pretty much everything from the internet to the touchscreen to Siri to the chips were funded by the US taxpayer ultimately, mostly through spending that went into defense. So when the public sector sends a signal but allows the private sector to operate, allows transparent competitive markets, but puts money into R&D and sets a clear strategy, it's amazing what the private sector and the public sector can achieve. But until we get to that stage, we're going to be stuck in this paralysis.
Okay, one word from Xavier Lépine.
A motif has been that growth is often Schumpeterian, that is, destruction of value when there's technological innovation. In other words, you create the photocopier, you destroy the carbon paper industry. The fact is, the day that things are moving much faster and faster, investors are being asked to react very quickly because everything is accelerating. This takes me back to what I said earlier. If there are no clear indicators of global governance, investors have no choice but to go as fast as they can. So following the indicator, the question from the gentleman was, what should we do in terms of action? Well, if I had one action I could take today, it would be, through Green Cross or whatever, it would be, let us create an indicator to monitor the quality of global governance. And that would help us to slow down speculation, perhaps.
Concrete answer, créer un indicateur de la gouvernance.
Create an indicator of global governance. We'll put that in the records of the conference. I'll ask you to conclude because we only have 5 minutes left. Very quickly, we'll ask each member of the panel in 20 seconds to say what needs to be done. First thing, one last question, very quickly.
I wanted to suggest to ask each for ourselves, what have we done ourselves to change over the last year, the last 5 years, the last 10 years? And what are we going to do in the future on a private level? And then, if we are stuck in changing our behavior, to ask for help of those around us.
René de Vries. I'm a Vice President with Green Cross Canada. I have a question for Mr. Lépine. Is he not aware of the backlash and pushback against global governance? And maybe that's one answer to why people are cynical and why youth is not involved in politics. Because when in this brave new world order, concentrated business ownership is combined with eco-fascism, people are not interested. People want to make the right choices in freedom.
He's aware, but it's not because he's aware that he agrees. That's what he says. Okay, so thank you. I would like to conclude this roundtable by one word from each panelist, what should be done first. So we have already one answer. Dimitri, please, your answer.
One word is leadership. This is going to happen. The transition is inevitable. We'll at some point reach a tipping point where actually...
what should be done? What should be done first? What would you do? What would you do?
Well, so what I would do, be very clear, I would try and show leadership by setting a policy framework that's clear and credible, but that requires a common understanding and a public discourse. Otherwise it won't be credible.
Jerry Jones, what would you do? First action.
On the issue of Syria, great and lasting movements are movements of people and attitudes. Consider, we now have 2 million refugees out of Syria. What would have been the outcome today if we had 2 million people walking back into Syria saying the violence must stop? Okay, I would organize that.
Your action for climate change, what would you do to change the situation?
Yeah, just on Syria, that's...
Okay. Would you add something? Mr. Lubbers, what would you do? Your first action, not what should be done, but what would you do?
Thank you for Syria, but I want to say one word on the indicator.
Yes?
Indicator. You asked for an indicator. For me, the indicator is the capacity for politics, business, and civil society to work together. If you look to the situation, there you have to measure it. That's the indicator. Thank you.
Johnson, your first action?
Well, as I said in my opening comment, that it's very dangerous to have a single simple solution, but if I was going to do anything, if I could, and it was in my dreams, I'd introduce a very heavy global tax on carbon. It would show determination, it would show leadership, and it would shift resources in the direction we want, and it would send messages that are both about ideas as well as about actions.
And last but not least, Christopher, what would be your, if you are in power tomorrow, what would you do?
As it is not long ago, as I was in school, my first action would be to change education, to change what we teach in schools, to focus more on responsibility, to show other ways how we can live, and to show them and take the new generation, that they realize that they were so lucky and they realize their responsibility they have and start to do something and not just live the way other generations before them have done this.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I would like to conclude and say it was very interesting. Thank you to the panelists.